Hello, everybody. Jason here from the Coalface podcast. I've created a new sub-series called Mentoring Moments, and Mentoring Moments is composed of clips taken from my one-on-one and group mentorship sessions where we discuss e-commerce, digital, retail, and so much more. Hopefully you get a lot out of this. Enjoy.
Thanks, Jason. So
great to be with you again, Michael. And just for those that haven't sort of heard our discussions before, Michael, you help run an agency and an e-commerce agency, and so oftentimes what we end up talking about tends to be, more agency related, sort of more engagement related. How do we engage with clients? How do we manage expectations? Some of the more technical things of engaging with clients through that e-commerce development process. So, we're having another one-to-one session. Our last one-to-one session was really, really good. We covered some good ground that I think was really beneficial to a wide variety of people that might be listening to this. So fire away with your questions for this week.
Okay, cheers, Jason. So the question for this week is, as we all know, agencies, as we discussed last call, agencies don't make much profit in website builds due to project creep and those type of things. And I think we all agree that the true profit is in a retainer base with a client towards a growth strategy, basically where we offer a certain amount of hours for a certain figure, and for those hours we do X, Y, and Z tasks. How would you go about setting up a growth strategy for a client, or how would you go about if you didn't offer it first time? How would you go about introducing that as a service to your clients?
Yeah, so usually in my experience, and you're absolutely right, I think almost any agency would agree with you that projects can be, the initial build project can be hit or miss in terms of profitability. Sometimes you'll make money, sometimes you'll lose money. Hopefully across the spectrum of build projects, you'll at least break even, or at least be a little bit profitable across the lot. And you're going to keep your team engaged, you're going to keep your team busy, you're going to keep your team fed in the meantime and working on new exciting stuff, and ultimately bringing new clients into the fold, which is the idea of taking them on for these new builds. They are risky unless you only engage on a time and materials basis for your web builds, but oftentimes clients will sort of pin you into the corner of giving them a fixed price quote so that they can then budget. They can budget it in terms of CapEx, and then start thinking about OpEx post live and all those sorts of things. So sometimes time and materials just isn't suitable to win deals effectively, in a nutshell. So you kind of got to throw a dart at the dartboard, do a really good job in discovery, do a really good job in design, and then once you've kind of got the requirements and the design signed off, then you should be in a pretty good position to give a pretty accurate quote for the actual build, to where you can at least you don't lose your shirt on it. So you're absolutely right. I think that almost all agencies struggle with initial project build profitability, because there are oftentimes expectations from the client side that are difficult to uncover during discovery, and you don't necessarily know how they want to engage or what type of client they're going to be in terms of their level of demand until you actually get into a build with them. So, everybody is feeling each other out in those first early days, but until the rubber meets the road, you don't really know. And so you're absolutely right. Most agents rely on those post-live managed service engagements it's at that point where they can sort of start guaranteeing profitability, right? Because they usually move on to a retainer engagement where the client is now paying on an hourly rate basis for every single hour of delivery that you do for them. And so that you can guarantee that whatever your margin between what it's costing you to buy those hours from your team and then resell those hours to clients, you make the spread, you make the arbitrage, right? And so you usually are going to be guaranteed you'll be profitable. Now, even in those scenarios, some of the challenges that come into that are, if something that you develop under a retainer, even if it breaks a month later or whatever, it could be something that the client even does from a configuration perspective or something else, and they sometimes will try to point the finger back at you and say, oh, this broke, you should be fixing it for free, it shouldn't come out of our retainer. So you still have to manage the relationship. Even under a retainer engagement, you still have to tightly manage both expectations, delivery, support, and most of the retainer engagements cover both enhancements and support. So if something does break, or if they break something like that, usually you'll go in, you'll fix it under their retainer, as well as enhance and extend, as I like to call it, under the retainer engagement. Now some e-commerce development agencies will also have a marketing arm of their business, meaning that they provide digital marketing services to their customers. Now, in those scenarios, for those types of agencies, that is almost always going to be the lion's share of the work, right? It's going to be new campaigns, it's going to be new functionality, it's going to be new ways of engaging with the customer, it's going to be new ways of capturing zero and first party data, it's going to be new ways of exposing product attributes to customers on the front end in an engaging way. It's going to be all the neat UX UI stuff that marketers in the coloring in department tend to come up with, as part of an ongoing marketing engagement. Now, that can be really good because it furnishes a runway of work back to the development side of the business under retainer to deliver that work. Where it becomes risky, and I've experienced this, where an agency is quote unquote more full service, basically you have to deliver perfectly on the marketing side and you have to deliver perfectly on the development side. Otherwise, you can lose the client either way. You could be doing perfect development, and if they're not happy with your marketing, they'll leave. You could be doing perfect marketing, but if they're not happy with your development, they'll leave. So it's kind of it's a bit of a double-edged sword with offering full service. Now, if you're a pure development agency and they are working, either they've got an internal resource for marketing, or they work with a secondary partner, which is the more common thing. They'll work with like a marketing agency that doesn't do the development, but they do the marketing, they do the campaign development, they do they set up the campaigns in Klaviyo and all the other marketing automation and CDP. They do all the CDP work in terms of segmentation and all that sort of stuff, right? And so oftentimes the other third-party agency, the marketing agency, if you can form a really good working relationship with them, then they are actually going to fill in your sprints with work, right? Because they want to do new things. And so that's oftentimes a source of work. Now, if you've got really good, strong account managers that know the businesses that they're working with super well, and they understand their goals really well, and they understand the type of experience that they're trying to create with their client very well, there's two additional sources of work outside of marketing, right? There is the roadmap outside of the MVP build, which is usually developed during the build, meaning that during discovery and throughout the build, there's oftentimes nice to haves and wish list items that we didn't get in to the initial build. And usually that'll cover anywhere from 6 to 12 months of retainer work the moment that you go live. So basically, the moment you come out of warranty period, most development agencies will give like a 30-day warranty period post-live to fix any post-live issues. And then they go into the retainer period from the second month post-live onwards. And then basically you get straight into that roadmap of nice to have and wish list items under retainer. So usually you've got anywhere from 6 to 12 months worth of work to start developing a tighter relationship. So usually the PM during the build will hand over that nice to have and that all those wish list items that they gathered during discovery and build. They'll hand that over to the AM and they'll say, hey, these were the kind of things we were talking about. And look, you take these over, you prioritize them with the client for post-live engagement, and then you get them scheduled in, you work through the delivery flow. So that usually gets you through 6 to 12 months. During that 6 to 12 months, the account manager should be deeply embedding themselves effectively into the client's business. So they should be having, at a bare minimum, weekly sprint meetings with the client, talking to them about what's going on in their business, and usually, even if they've got an outsourced marketing agency, they will have at least a marketing manager or somebody internally in the business that's driving customer experience, is driving testing, is driving innovation, is driving, from a technical perspective, there's usually someone on the client side who kind of owns that the web customer experience side of the business. Sometimes it sits with technical, sometimes it sits with e-com, sometimes it sits with marketing, and sometimes it's contributed to by all three. But ultimately, particularly if they've got a robust testing program in place, that is also a source of significant amount of ongoing retainer work as they implement tests, and then they also implement the winners in a final way, right? They modify the site as opposed to modifying it temporarily for testing. They actually implement the winning solutions. So testing what is left over after the initial build, that's usually 2 massive work streams post-live. The final one is really developing effectively a user experience innovation roadmap in conjunction with the customer to say, okay, we're doing all these amazing things today, but all of the functionality that we're thinking about adding, it doesn't necessarily have to have a marketing benefit, meaning it doesn't have to directly lead to more conversions. But if we can improve the customer experience, whether it be by removing friction at multiple points throughout the website, maybe they are a consumable goods retailer, and so therefore you think about putting in, a subscription service, adding a subscription service to the website. Or maybe they've got really amazing product data, and now we can start creating infographics out of this product data, or we can start creating unique iconography, for example. And I've seen this be a really big body of work, especially for big catalogs. Let us go away and let us design some artwork to go along with key product attributes of your catalog, so that instead of just putting the text there with bullet points of 3 bullet points with attributes of this product, we're actually going to show these visually. We're going to show these attributes visually at key stages of the customer journey, and then we're gonna modify the front end logic to where when one of these attributes is called, we're actually going to display this iconography in place of the text, right?
Yeah.
Or alongside the text, or whatever the case may be, so that there's basically what we're trying to do for the customer is to aid in discovery, appreciation of the product, and ultimately purchasing, to give them all the information we possibly can. And what we're also trying to do is to reduce the cognitive load of differentiating products, finding products, discovering products, educating themselves about the product, and ultimately buying the product. We're trying to remove the cognitive load. And if they have to read a bunch of text, they might have a ton of information, really good long descriptions, really good attributes, structured and unstructured data around their products. But sometimes just turning those attributes and those big blocks of text into something more visual reduces the cognitive load, because humans are very visual, right? So it's easier to digest visual things than it is to read a paragraph's worth of text or attributes, or even filter by attributes. So, in helping your clients, for example, to understand, I think you can give them strategic assistance, even where it doesn't require development work. Your account manager can give them strategic assistance in helping them to understand, for example, if they today only have unstructured product data in the long description, that means we can't use those for filtering anything. So if they've got a big catalog and hundreds and hundreds of categories with hundreds of products per category, that is a high cognitive load exercise for the customer. They're going to have to use site search, perhaps drill down quite heavily into the navigation structure. So you can help them further develop and refine not only their information architecture, but also their filtering architecture, right? And you can do that by helping them re-engineer their product data in smarter ways and move stuff out of unstructured into structured product attributes that then can be leveraged in multiple ways other than just as a descriptive element. So I think there's lots of things that you can do strategically with a customer that, yes, some of that will require work on their side to prep certain things so that you can implement them. But I think if you can take them on a journey of refinement over time, you will stay very busy. You will usually be able to come up with more work than they have money for a retainer for. So they might be on, I don't know, let's just say hypothetically they're on 40 hours a month, right? It's pretty easy to come up with 40 hours a month worth of work and roadmap that out. But, and what I used to do when I was working with clients as an account manager is oftentimes we would come up with mini projects, and we would say, okay, let's break up this mini project over 3 months worth of retainer work, because, we don't want you to ask you to pay an extra 150 hours over and above your retainer to implement this mini project. Let's just roadmap out this mini project over 3 months worth of retainer work. And that's another way where you can make sure that you're using your retainer, is to come up with these isolated, discrete mini projects that have a specific outcome associated with them, but it chews up the retainer as well.
That sounds great. I think the key is what we discussed in the first meeting, where it's expectation from the very start. Because you will get clients who will ask, well, why is it being done in a retainer? Why can't it be done in the first project build? That's the beauty of making sure your discovery and your expectations are raised from the very beginning, to say, we're then going to make intermittent improvements. And that's the key, I suppose, to get over to a client, to say that your website, when we build a website, that's not the end of the journey of your website build. It needs to be improved over time, and we can help you with that.
I mean, I like to think of it as the website launch is literally step one. That's what I like to think of it as, and that's how I try to coach clients to understand it as. It's like buying it's a little bit. It doesn't even matter what the state of the MVP is at launch. I still think of it as you've bought this car off the car lot. It's a new car. Sure, it does all the new things that new cars should. You're not going to have to worry about it leaking oil for 100,000 K or 200,000 K. You're not going to have to worry about all these routine maintenance things. But what you may want to do is you may want to put a wrap on it. You may want to put a wing on it. You may want to put rims on it. You may want to put suspension on it. You may want to hop up the motor. You may want to put a chip in it. There's all these different things that people want to do to personalize and enhance and extend their vehicle and the experience that they have with their vehicle over time. You might want to put a new stereo system in it. There's all sorts of things you want to do to improve the experience of owning that vehicle that's nothing to do with related with maintenance, right? And particularly with modern SaaS platforms, in the olden days, what I like to call the bad old days of self-hosted software, you would easily spend 50% of your retainer just keeping the lights on and keeping a site functioning. With like a Magento or other self-hosted platforms, literally routine maintenance, patching, and upgrades were 50% of your retainer or more. Nowadays, with modern SaaS platforms, it's pretty rare that you are doing break fix type maintenance, which means something like 80 to 90% of the retainer now goes towards enhance and extend. And so my argument always is, if a business doesn't have enough of a strategic vision for where they want to take their customers from a journey perspective over time, and that should always evolve. It doesn't have to be revolutionary, but it should be evolutionary, right? And it always concerns me if a business doesn't have evolving mindset and evolving vision for where they want to take their customers moving forward, then that's always a concern of mine. And I would always, in that environment, I would say, look, if you guys are struggling with some of that strategic vision, then maybe it's time to bring in like an e-commerce manager or a head of digital or a CDO, or giving more authority or responsibility maybe to your marketing manager. There's got to be someone in the business from the client side who's responsible for innovation, for customer experience, and for all of the ways and touch points in which marketing hits the customer, the way it's delivered to the customer through the website. And so I always like to think of it as, look, we can assist with strategy, and even as a consultant, I can assist with strategy, meaning I can give pointers and I can give advice, but ultimately strategy must be defined by the business. You can't rely on a third party to define your strategy. You got to define the strategy internally, and then you can take on very competent quality partners to help execute that vision and the tactics associated with that. And so those are the kind of discussions I try to be pretty frank, actually, with clients. I try to be really transparent. I try to be really honest with them and say, look, if you guys are struggling with having a strategic evolving vision of how you're going to engage with your customers moving forward, then maybe we should move a little higher in the discussion and say, okay, instead of thinking about sprint to sprint road mapping, maybe we should think about organizational structure. Maybe we should think about business processes. Maybe we should look at data design inside your business. Maybe we should look at data capture from zero and first party data. Maybe we should introduce into the website some zero and first party data capture strategies, like, for example, using Jebbit or other quiz commerce and other forms of engagement commerce that also gathers more zero and first party data that then you can leverage to personalize the customer experience over time to where they feel like it's really tailored to them. So I think those types of discussions where we get out of the minutia of the day-to-day and we get more strategic, work will always, basically there's no waste ever in doing good strategic work, because solid tactics and deliverables will always drop out of that strategic work.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting you said about e-commerce managers, to be honest, Jason, because I previously worked for an agency where an e-commerce manager, a particular e-commerce manager, as they moved businesses, they would always go back to the agency that I worked for. And likewise, our agency, even if they were speaking to a client who was on the lookout for an e-commerce manager, they'd actually recommend the e-commerce managers we previously worked with, because they see the win-win relationship between an agency and a good e-commerce manager.
Well, I tell you, a great agency will make an e-commerce manager look like a god, and vice versa. Really, a great e-commerce manager will keep an agency fed for life because of the strategic innovation that they bring to the business over time. But as an e-commerce manager, I'm not going to go and do the development work. So I always want to have a really strong relationship with my agency partner, because I'm relying on them to help deliver our vision for our business. And so it is very much a hand in glove scenario. And I've seen the exact same thing. Basically, if an e-commerce manager has a great agency relationship and then they switch businesses that they work for, switch brand, they'll oftentimes try to kick out the agency. Even if that brand already has an agency, they'll sometimes try to kick them to the curb over time and get the new agency positioned because they have a great working relationship with them. And why wouldn't you? If you've got a great high level of trust relationship with an agency, those are hard to come by. They are hard to come by, and they take a lot of time to develop. And so if you've fought hard to get that, and then you leave the brand, you don't want to kind of throw away all the work that you did to build up that relationship. You want to take it with you.
Yeah. Superb. Yeah.
So apart from sort of helping to manage the managed services side and the retainer side of the business, anything else that has come across your mind over the last couple of weeks?
No, it's just getting back into work mode really from the long holiday, and obviously we're slightly behind, but it's all targeted towards Christmas now and Black Friday and that type of thing. So we're starting those conversations to make sure clients are prepped for it.
Very nice. Yeah, it's always a fun time of the year when you start talking about code lockdowns, when you start talking about, we can continue to work behind the scenes on staging, but we're not going to deploy anything after, say, mid-October or whatever. Most agencies will go into some form of code lockdown, internally, that they'll communicate to their clients, look, we won't deploy anything to live unless it's absolutely mission critical or campaign related. We're just not going to deploy anything to production, from mid-October until mid-Jan kind of thing.
Yeah.
So get all your ducks in a row and make sure you let us know kind of what work you have in the pipeline to set up for Christmas so that we can get it scheduled in, because there's always a resource crunch right before Christmas. It's just a massive resource crunch, was what I've experienced working agency side, because everybody wants everything yesterday. And then after Christmas, they go dark oftentimes until February. And you literally don't hear from the client until February when everybody comes back from the holidays.
Yeah. That's it. It's a fun time.
It is. It's always crazy, and you're going to get a break on the other side, but you don't get much sleep in the lead up to Christmas.
Yeah, that's it.
Awesome, Michael. Well, great conversation yet again, and we'll look forward to catching up in a couple of weeks' time. And she has got some great questions, I think, today that will be applicable to a really broad audience, particularly as we come into Christmas and we come into kind of what we call the e-commerce hype cycle of the year. We come into the period where everybody starts to plan what they're going to do from an e-commerce campaign perspective, from a marketing campaign perspective, what they're going to do from a technical perspective to get themselves ready for the holiday season. I work primarily B2B businesses. And so the businesses that I deal with probably tend to be less cyclical or less seasonal than a lot of B2C or D2C businesses. But certainly there is an element of seasonality even for B2B businesses that service B2C and D2C businesses, and that are going through, this is their busiest time of the year. And this is when they try to capitalize and consolidate the most in terms of their market share, in terms of their revenues, in terms of their profitability. They're oftentimes willing to take a hit on profitability for the sake of revs. And so this time of the year, going into this time of the year, it tends to be a very campaign-driven, discount-driven time of the year by definition. And so we start seeing basically, as we get closer to Halloween and beyond, that's when we start seeing the real discounting start to become a major issue for retailers, and therefore really challenging unit economics as a result. And so that's why I think these questions from Ashley are super relevant to this time of the year. So let's just crack into these, Ashley. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great. So you mentioned something very specific, which I think is a great point, which is how do we prepare for a strong Q4? How do we have, for example, a strong Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and then attendant to that? And I think your second question is related in a way, which is how do we source and produce creative at scale? How to scale social ads? How do we effectively scale up for what is a very busy time of the year? And I think my first idea would be to caution brands about over discounting. And I'll tell you why. Even though you may pick up a lot of additional customers and a lot of additional revenue at this time of the year, I think that oftentimes it's at the expense of profitability. Not only, is it at the expense of profitability, but it is also at the expense of clean customer data. And let me tell you what I mean. So if you go out there and you do a lot of campaign-based discounting, a lot of campaign-based promotions, The problem with that is that oftentimes what you are doing is you are courting the most discount sensitive customers in the market. They're the least brand loyal. They're the most discount sensitive. So in the industry, it's a term called propensity to discount. What is the propensity to discount of the customer? And this is definitely a common segment inside of CDP and marketing automation platforms. What is the propensity to discount, meaning how often does a customer use a coupon code, for example? How often do they buy something when it's only on special, when it's on a promoted discount price? How often do they respond to a campaign email and that triggers the conversion? So there is this propensity to discount metric. And oftentimes what we see is that during campaign periods, you get a whole bunch of new customers, but they're totally non-brand loyal. They're not going to shop with you again. They will churn very quickly. They will become inactive very quickly. And effectively what you've done is you've gone out and you've got a new customer. You've acquired them usually very expensively from a CAC perspective through these campaigns that you're running, combined with you haven't made great margin on that initial sale, combined with it's polluting your data now with a whole bunch of customers that are not going to be brand loyal. And you definitely don't want them to be part of your segmentation, at least initially, until you see whether they're going to purchase again. So that would be my biggest overarching caution about this time of the year, is that yes, it can be a very high revenue time of the year, but it can also be a time of the year that if you follow the crowd of the discounting, the hype crowd, the discounting crowd, it can ultimately lead to bad outcomes for the business. So if you think that on the flip side of the coin, now I've talked about the negatives, let's talk about the positives, okay? The upside could be, for example, and this is where strategy comes into play. This is where strategy becomes very important. If you've got strong pricing power, meaning you don't have a tremendous amount of competition in your vertical, then of course, go for gold. If you've got strong pricing power and you want to give maybe a small discount, or you want to participate in a small campaign on a marketplace, for example, that is a marketplace-wide campaign, then I can understand maybe wanting to do that. And you may not lose much margin in the process. You may also be able to achieve economies of scale, both in terms of manufacturing and distribution, that you can't achieve any other way. So in other words, if you're targeting dramatically increasing scale, let's say over the next 3 to 4 months, you can increase scale by 50%. What that may mean is that if you are using, say, for example, a contract manufacturer, you can move up a tier in scale. You can now get a discount that offsets the discounting that you're going to have to do for your customers. Plus, if you can order enough to get you through, say, February, March next year, then what that means is that when you come off now your margins, because you've reached economies of scale, you can now make more margin on those full price sales in the new year, for example. So strategically, there are some times when you want to participate in these large sale periods, not just for customer acquisition and trying to retain those customers for a second and third purchase, but also to reach economies of scale, whether it be with a supplier, a manufacturer, a distributor, whoever it is that you're buying and sourcing your product from. You may be in a position whereby you can move up to that next tier and get a discount. So there are times when discounting makes sense, but it should always be done in a data-informed way. It should always be done in a strategic way. It should never be done in a pure follow the crowd sort of way. And I think that would be my overarching advice for heavy typical promotional periods. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
And then you were talking about this is a time of the year when ads go through the roof, when we start seeing everybody running ads. And so therefore, particularly on paid and performance, paid social, pay-per-click, Google ads, Amazon ads, etc. And so what happens is that the need for creative, particularly if you're running A/B testing on creative across an ad set or something like that, you now need 2, 3, 4 pieces of creative, whereby, where in the past you might have only needed one. And so therefore, how do we do this at scale? And I think the only way to be able to do that without breaking the bank is probably to use freelancers. I've seen that be very effective. You can give very strong campaign briefs. You can even give sample creative to freelancers, and you can take them on for short windows of time, 1, 2, 3 months at a time. And I know that obviously you work for a brand, but you also do freelance work yourself. You also have your own side hustle. You also do your own marketing work for clients. And so this is probably a time of the year when you're probably going to see demand for your work go up as well, because brands will, even if they've got an internal marketing team, even if they've got an internal creative team, even if they've got internal designers, this is when they need to tap outside resources for additional work. I know that when I used to work for brands, and the most recent brand that I worked for a few years ago now, we had a 12 strong internal marketing team, and we had a couple of creatives on that team. But during the peak sale periods, we would have to bring in an additional creative designer for 3 days a week. And we would let our lead designer find someone that they thought they could work with. They would take a look at their portfolio of work. They would see what other brand work they've done before, and they would say, okay, look, we've got enough work for you for, say, 3 days a week. Now, this is when people were still coming into the office. Now, that's not really required anymore. And so, the pool of talent that you can pull from, whether that be through Fiverr or whether that be through, we have several different creative co-ops down here in ANZ, where they're basically an online co-op of freelancers, where it's a website where you can find freelancers that are creatives. They work across lots of different areas of digital. It's called The Pond. There's probably, for North America, there's probably similar sites where it's almost like a marketplace of creatives. And so therefore you can sign up, you can find the briefs. And the other thing that you can also do, there are excellent, and I've interviewed a few of them on the podcast. There are excellent influencer marketplaces, right? Influencer management platforms, whereby you can create a single brief and then you can put that out to, you can filter all of the influencers that are on that platform by their audience size, by their target demo, by a whole bunch of different filters around what their attributes as an influencer are. That could be another way to do creative at scale, is to engage micro or medium-sized influencers that are affordable. Then they go and create the creative, because they are the creatives, right, at the end of the day. And so you can put out a brief and you can say, okay, I want to engage 5 micro influencers in this vertical. Here's the brief. And then what they do through the influencer management platform, they will come back to you with a pitch effectively and say, here's why you should hire me. Here's some of the campaigns I've done before. Here's some of my creative ideas. And then they create the creative at scale that you can then repurpose across your account, and then also put some money behind their posting as well for better distribution. So I think there's probably quite a few ways you can achieve scale at this time of the year. But again, I just go back to, just be careful of how you scale and the types of customers ultimately that you're going to get through this period, because I think you have to really strategically acquire, especially at this time of the year.
For sure. And do you have any of the influencer marketplaces that you would recommend?
Look, I don't, only because I don't work with influencer marketplaces myself. I haven't before. There's one down in Australia that comes from Australia. It's called Tribe Influence. That's very popular down here. There's another one that I've just had on the pod. It's called Affable, Affable, and I would check that one out as well. I've had them on the podcast. It's episode 148 on the podcast if you want to have a listen. I had the founder and the co-founder and CEO, Nisarg Shah, on the podcast. I'd go and have a listen to that one as well. We also had another one. I'm just having a very quick look through here to see. I know we had another one a little while ago here, where they were talking specifically about. I don't want to take too much time here. If you go to the podcast page, you can search by influencer, the word influencer, and then all of the podcast episodes that we've had around this will pop up. But there are a few of them out there now. They're proliferating pretty quickly, and you could try out a couple of different influencer marketing platforms and just see which one works best for you from a pricing perspective, because some of them charge a percentage of effectively the campaign that you execute. Some of them charge a fixed SaaS fee for accessing their platform, plus when you run searches, and they all have different charging models for how they bill you. So some might be more flexible than others for what you need. So I would just Google influencer marketing platforms and or influencer marketing marketplaces, and then have a look at 3 or 4 of them and see which one works best for you and what you're trying to achieve.
For sure. Great. Thank you.
No worries. And then you also talked about, you had a key question about how do we create a great feedback loop with customers so that when we're, especially at this time of the year, when we're going to be acquiring usually more customers than normal, how can we create a great feedback loop with our customers? I think there's a couple of key ways to do this. I think the first one is to implement something like a feedbackify on your website, that it's effectively a JavaScript-driven feedback tab that gets implemented on the site, and it shows up on every single page of the site as a slide up or slide down tab or slide from the side tab. And I tell you, if customers have the opportunity to give you quick feedback like that, and they encounter a problem on the website, or let's say a page doesn't work, or something's broken on the website, or it's broken for their device or their screen view, whether it's in portrait or landscape mode, and they all of a sudden something goes off the screen and they have the opportunity to tell you about it, they certainly will. And then what I've done in the past is when we've implemented this, we plumb the feedback that comes from those directly into the CRM for action, and it automatically creates a ticket. And the great thing about those platforms is that when the feedback comes through, it automatically tells you what device, if it can detect it, it tells you the OS, it tells you the browser they were using. Basically, it gives you all the information you need, especially if they had a problem with the website. It will give you all the information you need to be able to troubleshoot it based on the device, the browser, the screen size, all the components of where they accessed it from, their IP address, all those sorts of things. And that can be very useful in trying to troubleshoot. And it also tells you the URL, the specific page that they were on when they submitted the feedback. And so that can sometimes be really critical too. So if you give people the opportunity, they will, especially people that are frustrated or having a problem, they will definitely give you feedback. The other one that is really critical in the moment is live chat. We see that at this time of the year, oftentimes brands will expand the hours that they have live chat available. So if their normal hours are, say, 9 to 5 for live chat, this time of the year, they might make it 9 to 9. So they might expand effectively their help desk service 3 to 4 to 5 additional hours a day for the next 4 months to get them through Christmas, and then they'll go back to their normal hours. And that can help not only with frustration, but it can also help people find the right product, answer questions, increase conversion rates, and also increase cross sells and upsells when they can make complementary recommendations at the same time. So instead of just using it as a customer service channel, it is now a broader sales and account management channel instead. And so those two things I think are really important. I think additionally, social listening becomes really important at this time, and installing something, running something from your side that has heavy sentiment analysis associated with it. So plugging sentiment analysis into your social media so that you can do social listening at scale, and it can surface sentiment analysis back to the business at scale across all of your social channels becomes really critical, because oftentimes this time of the year, it becomes difficult to monitor every single social channel and every single comment and every single piece of feedback. So I think having software to help in tracking sentiment analysis becomes super helpful this time of the year. So at least if something bubbles up that's a really bad piece of feedback, for example, then you make sure that one doesn't slip through the cracks, and you can go and you can respond in the social channel. Plus you can engage with the customer and say, hey, we saw your comment on social. Hey, we'd love to fix this for you, or we'd love to work this out for you. Or we saw you had a question, we wanted to come back and answer it for you. So it can be very powerful. It can be a very powerful conversion tool as well. So those would be probably, from a feedback loop perspective, that's probably one of the most powerful things you can do. You can implement live events as well. Live streaming events can be really powerful for this as well. Live stream shopping. So not only live stream shopping, and there are really great live stream shopping platforms. We had Frost Lee from Social Chat on the pod. We've had a couple of other live stream shopping platforms come on the pod and talk about their services. The great thing about Social Chat is that they not only have on-site live shopping, but it also live streams to social media platforms that support live streams. So people can interact with your live stream in real time and ask questions in a two-way, bi-directional way so that you can answer them in the live stream. So that's another great way to get feedback in real time, is to do live stream shopping events. And that's becoming very popular, particularly at this time of year, is to do a live stream shopping event where you talk about the product, you maybe demo the product, you interact with your guests as they're listening to the live stream. So you set a time in advance. Hey, we're going to be doing this live stream. A lot of these platforms allow you to repurpose the videos from the live stream directly onto the PDP of the product so that you have this evergreen content that comes out of the live stream at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. The company I'm working for is doing that on our Amazon marketplace with Amazon influencers, and that's definitely been helpful for us.
Awesome. That's great. So I think you had made a point about what are some of the untapped channels to reach potential customers, drive traffic, and increase sales, such as Pinterest ads, TikTok, Snapchat, WhatsApp. Also, start thinking about think particularly with Pinterest. Now, it's invite only at the moment, but inevitably, they will most likely open it up to a much broader audience. Look at Pinterest Shuffles. So Pinterest has just released their new viral social media app called Shuffles, which allows you to effectively create almost like collages dynamically, and it will do dynamic cutouts of specific images, both from and to Pinterest. And then you can publish your shuffles directly to Pinterest, and those can obviously link out to products as well. So I think that Shuffles is going to be big. It's really difficult to get an invite if you go onto social media. If you go onto TikTok or you go onto Reddit, there are threads that you can jump into. There are posts that you can jump into to try to get, because once you've been added to Shuffles, I think you get 3 invites that you then can reshare, so you can pay it forward once you get an invite. I'd look out for that as well and try to get onto new platforms like that early, similar to how when people got onto TikTok early, they built very large audiences very fast. So I'd keep an eye on these new places where you can build audience quickly and at zero or very low cost. I think that absolutely you can explore these other channels, but also be careful about spreading yourself too thin, particularly if you haven't systematized producing content for those channels yet. If you haven't built out a process to do those channels at scale, it's difficult to reach escape velocity on these channels unless you're really consistent with them. So coming in and trying to build audience for 3 months of the year is really difficult unless you've started to put in the groundwork, a year ago, right? It takes time to build on these channels. And that's why influencer marketing, I think, on these channels is probably a better way to go, because they've already got the audience. And so if you're not already strong on TikTok, if you have 0 audience on TikTok, sure, you could go viral, but it's harder now than it used to be to go viral on TikTok. It used to be very easy, or relatively easy. It's much harder now. It's harder to get cut through on TikTok because it's so noisy now. There's so much competition on TikTok now. So, what used to be on Instagram, I like to think of it like this. Instagram, having 100,000 followers on Instagram is still a pretty big deal. It's pretty hard to achieve. Whereas on TikTok, having 1 million followers is now a pretty big deal. Like, the floor has been raised because of the discovery mechanism inside TikTok. So it's almost ad inflation, but it's influencer inflation. So it's harder to reach scale on these platforms because so many people have already reached scale. So many creators have already reached scale on those platforms. And so therefore it becomes even harder yet again to get cut through, because there's so many creators that already have, say, 1 million followers. So yeah, just be cautious of that. Work with established influencers where you can and start building in advance would be my advice on that particular thought. What do you look for when you're looking to optimize a paid search account? How do you analyze the data? Look, I don't do paid search. I haven't done paid search for a very long time. I'm certainly not an expert here. I would just, from an overall perspective, my overarching advice here would be to keep a really close eye on CAC, customer acquisition cost, and I would look at it by channel. And I would be looking to implement very strong 0 and first-party data collection mechanisms on your website, because if you're going to go out there and you're going to be spending a whole lot of money to acquire new customers, you at least want to capture as much 0 and first party data as you can off them to make them as valuable to your business as you can. And so you can tailor their site experience on a more one-to-one basis. And so you can tailor their marketing on a more one-to-one basis. So you want to implement things like quiz commerce, right? You want to implement something like FormToro or Jebbit or some kind of quiz commerce mechanism on the website where you're capturing preferences at key points along the customer journey, where they explicitly tell you what their interests are in a way that benefits them. so that they give up data, but it benefits them in a very tangible way. So those are the types of things I think that from an overarching strategy perspective, you want to make sure that you are maximizing your return on investment at a time when CAC typically goes through the roof, because people's efforts at acquisition go through the roof. So the competition for things like social ads go through the roof. So therefore the cost goes through the roof at this time of the year would be my overarching bit of advice there.
Awesome. Thank you.
No worries. Hopefully I look, again, I don't live my life in digital marketing. I don't offer customers digital marketing services. I don't do campaign services. I don't do any of those types of services. So this is really just actually mostly advice that has come from talking to people that specialize in marketing, and that's exactly what they do. I focus primarily on the operational and technical side of e-com. My advice is probably not as valuable as some of the people I've had on my podcast, for example, but hopefully it's still useful.
For sure. No, just getting another person's perspective. Obviously, you're talking to some of the brightest in the industry. You have lots of knowledge out there. So just getting your perspective and your view on things is really important, and it's helpful as well.
Awesome. Anything else you want to cover off today that was high on your priority list, or any spark of thought that came through those questions?
I think that's it for now. You left me with a lot to think about and a lot to execute on. So I think I'm good for right now.
Awesome. It's awesome having you on today, Ashley, and I'm looking forward to catching up again in a couple weeks' time.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. Thank you.
If you'd like to register for free for the mentor sessions with Jason Greenwood, head over to greenwoodconsulting.net, scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, and click Get Mentored by Jason. See you there.